Hi, and welcome to the Ygartua Art Chronicles podcast, where we explore the amazing life and career of Paul Ygartua. I'm Ed Hoskin, and today we are going to cover the early part of the period before Paul moved to Canada and became a professional painter. We'll find out about his roots, travelling, education, and all of his adventures in Liverpool, the Basque Country, and more. Well, hi Paul, and welcome to this first episode of the Ygartua Art Chronicles podcast. I'm looking forward to delving into your life and career throughout the next few weeks. And for this episode, this first episode, it makes sense to go right back to the origins, your beginnings. And I thought we'd start this whole journey using the word heritage, because I think that's a key element of your life, and you speak about heritage and pride of your origins quite a lot, and it also comes through in your work, of course. So let's go right back to the beginning and tell me where does Paul come from, and what was the start of your life? For example, your parents. Right.
Well, I was actually born just outside of Liverpool, in a small town. My father was Basque. He was a political refugee from the Basque Country in Spain, because during the Civil War, he was actually on a boat going around the world as a training to be an engineer. And the war broke out, and of course my father was of military age for Spain, so he would have had to go back and fight for Franco against his own people. So when the boat docked in Liverpool, there was about 20 Basque kids on the boat, all around 17, 18 years of age. And they were told that if they wished to, they could get political asylum and leave the ship and not go back to Spain. So that's what happened. That's how he ended up going to being in Liverpool and meeting my mother.
And how did so that boat was a Navy boat, was it, or was it an engineering boat?
It was a boat that was probably half of it was passengers, and he was training as an engineer on board. But it was going basically South America, all around the world, and then basically heading back to Bilbao in Spain, in the Basque Country, And
went to Liverpool probably because it was an enormous dock town.
That was the last port of call before they hit Spain. Luckily,
wow.
He got the information from the British to leave the ship if they wanted to.
So that's where I've read that there was a group. As I've read, there's a group of British, either civil servants or people there, explaining all that to your father as he sort of docked. Is that kind of what happened?
That's right. They came aboard, and they said any Basques that do not wish to go back to the war can actually leave the ship right now, and they would be getting help in Liverpool, getting help to relocate.
Wow,
which was interesting.
Yeah,
it was quite interesting. He couldn't speak a word of English, so I guess it took him. It was about 4 or 5 years that he had to learn English and get jobs and everything. And of course he was discriminated against to begin with, because they thought he was Spanish.
Oh yeah.
You see, which meant that they were against the Civil War and against Franco, the Brits. And because he was Basque, they didn't understand the difference between being Basque and being Spanish. So he had little problems,
Yeah, that's amazing. And what year was that? Do you know what year?
Well, it would be, let me see, 30. When did the war start? The Civil War.
38, 30.
Because when he got to England, of course, the Second World War started.
Oh, yeah.
As he got there. So it must have been, the Civil War must have been just before the World War. He was 17 years of age then.
So 2 years.
Spanish Civil War, I'm looking it up, it says 36 to 39.
Okay, so it started about the same time as the World War, wasn't it then? It must have been around the same time.
Or it finished
because Hitler gave Franco.
Oh.
Yeah, Franco gave Hitler a pass. He said, if you don't attack us, we won't join the opposition, and fight you. Mm-hmm. So that's how that happened,
So that was roughly then, and then as soon as he arrived, heated up in the UK as well, and war
That's
broke
right.
out a couple of years later.
He would have joined. He would have liked to have fought against the Germans, but he wasn't allowed to. So he actually joined the Home Guard, and the Home Guard consisted of him driving a truck around, delivering bombs to all the AK stations in Liverpool.
Wow.
So he used to do that during the air raids, and he said he used to drive with no lights on the truck so that he wouldn't attract attention.
Yeah. That's...
I mean, he had full of bombs. Can you imagine driving around full of bombs? And he said, I felt safer with the bombs in the back of the truck than staying at home waiting for one to land.
So he was in the Home Guard because I guess. Is it because he was a refugee that he was not allowed to fight in the
That's right,
main army?
because he wasn't. He was sort of political refugee, so that he wasn't actually allowed to. And plus, I don't know whether. Well, I guess at 17 he could have joined the war effort. I'm not sure how old they were. But anyway,
I think most of
one
them lied
reason or
as well.
another he couldn't. Yeah.
Yeah. And
He had some stories.
he did, yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, one of his famous stories was that he used to drive around in the truck delivering these bombs, but he didn't want to stop anywhere. So one day he was visiting a friend, and the friend said, oh, come on in and have a drink, And my dad said, nah, I feel better just driving my truck and, delivering these bombs, right? Anyway, he drove about 100 yards down the road and a bomb dropped on the house and killed everybody. So he felt his choice was pretty right.
Wow, that's fantastic. And so your father was from Basque heritage, and
yeah,
I've read in places that you're quite aware of your grandfather's activities and
oh yes,
and heritage back there, and the fact that he was quite well installed in the Basque Country.
He was actually he was a head chef on one of the biggest ocean liners, which went round the world as well. Of course, everybody from these villages usually went to sea. That was the way they made a living, and they'd send the money home to their families, because it was just a fishing village. But he ended up a head chef on the Reina del Pacifico, which was at the time, it was the biggest ocean liner in the world.
Wow.
And of course, being the head chef, the privileges were great because he used to have 5 taxis waiting when the boat came home to ship everything into the village that he'd acquired.
Fantastic.
He ended up buying half a mountain, and of course everybody was quite happy about that. The whole village loved him because he'd come home with so many gifts for everybody. He was a good guy, although he probably did bring home some gold objects and exchange the money, and did a few things that he acquired from Mexico. A lot of bartering.
And I imagine that the Ygartuas had to put up with a bit of Franco when they were there then as well. They had to live through that.
The military, the Guardia Civil, they rode all over the family farm. They took their horses to train there. They destroyed the crops. And my grandmother at the time was running the farm because, of course, my grandfather was away at sea for 9 months a year. And, they just came in and totally controlled the whole area, destroyed things, practiced with their horses, and crops, of course, were destroyed, Yeah, they were a pretty tough time in those days, Luckily, my grandmother did have a farm, so she was able to to share her crops with the villagers and everything, and so it worked out pretty good in the end. But boy, it was a tough time, of course, and it was still tough until Franco left. The Basques, they had the Guardia Civil, which is the police, military police, were there up until, I guess, I don't know, until about 20 years ago. Time flies, right?
Yeah. So if we move on to your dad is in the UK and the Second World War breaks out. At some point, he met the love of his life, apparently, Dorothy.
That's right. My mother, an artist as well. Yeah, she was obviously, first of all, she was actually engaged to a policeman, and he ended up getting killed in the war, and then she met my father. And so that was the love of her life, of course, and we ended up living, of course, in those days, no one had much money, and it was during the war. I wasn't, of course, around yet, and of course they lived with my auntie and then her sister. Then they lived with the gentleman who took my father in and helped him when he got off the boat. So, and then when I was born, at the end, just towards the end, right at the end of the war, then we ended up living in different places as well till I was 6 years of age, when they were able to end up getting a council house. So that was. Was that
living with the famous Mr. Percival?
Mr. Percival, that's right. Yes.
Fantastic English name. Yeah.
So Percival, yes.
So he was the first guy that had met your father off the boat, or he was the one who took him in?
Actually he was an Oxford graduate, and he had a very clever chap. But he had a house, and he was part of the group that went to the boat to help them relocate. And so each one of them took one of the guys from the boat and basically volunteered for them to stay at his house. And, he had no children, so it was nice that he was able to have a young man in the house and help him as well, of course,
Because your father was, 17, you said? Is that right?
Yeah, he was 17.
So good shape and, ready to
my dad was real physically fit type of guy.
And so they met. And what was your mother doing at the time? Or what was her?
She was a hairdresser working for her mother. Her mother had a hairdresser's shop in New Ferry, which was across the river from Liverpool, where Camelers was the big shipbuilding company there, and so New Ferry was about 5 miles from Camelers, which meant, of course, that during the air raids there's a lot of bombs falling all around because they were all aiming for the shipyards where they were building, submarines and things.
And at some point, little Paul was born.
Yes, that was the 16th of June 1945. Probably a month after the war had finished, or just before it had finished. Yeah, she said that she was carrying me for 9 months, of course, during the bombing and everything.
Yeah.
So that was quite an interesting time for her. That's why I probably was born only 4 pounds.
4 pounds? 4 pounds is what? 1 point...
A couple of less than 2 kilos.
Yeah, it's less than 2 kilos. Crikey, that's light, isn't it? Yeah. Wow.
I was told she was told I was perfect, just little.
And you're the firstborn, and you have a brother, or you had a brother, or you
a brother. He wasn't born for 10 years after me, because
that's right.
My father said after me it took him 10 years to decide to have another one. I said when I was 4 years of age, of course, we went back to Spain, to the Basque Country. And that's because my father, by then he was a British subject. But besides that, there was an amnesty. And he wasn't going to go back unless there was an amnesty, because it was 11 years after the Civil War had ended that they decided to give an amnesty for all the Basque men and women who had fled the country or were not there during the war,
Yeah.
And so we went back, and that was I was 4 years of age. We were met at the railway station with a donkey and cart to carry the suitcases and all of us back to the farm. My mother didn't know where she was going to.
Wow.
Leaving Liverpool, ending up in a farm with donkeys and cows.
And that was the first time your mother had been to Spain, I suppose, at all.
First time any of us, of course, yeah.
And in those days, what was it? Was it like a week-long boat trip, or how did it work back in those days?
Well, it was from Liverpool. I think it was just 3 or 4 days, maybe 4 or 5 days from Liverpool in those days,
Very exciting, I should imagine.
Yeah, it was, yeah. Well, it was. My mum was obviously impressed with the land because we had, half a mountain, and it was about it was right by the beach, so it had its own walk down to a little beach and everything, which was fantastic. For me anyway, I was on the beach every day. Fantastic,
yeah, a bit different from Liverpool, although by the water, I suppose. There's a link there, isn't there? I suppose.
Oh yeah, there is a link, but there was no English people anywhere, in those days.
In those days,
and I mean, no.
Nowadays, it's a bit different, but yeah.
Well,